The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall. Ambassador Zixithera stepped inside, her blue-scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights of Kepler Prime Station. Behind her walked 3 guards wearing the silver armor of the Valerian Empire. Their plasma rifles hung at their sides, a clear message to anyone watching. Across the circular chamber, Chancellor Morden waited with his own delegation. The crystalline collective leader stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body made of living diamond that refracted the light into rainbow patterns. His 4 arms were folded across his chest in the traditional pose of displeasure. The crystal beings never sat down, claiming that chairs were for weak flesh creatures. Between them sat Council Mediator Ixandra at the central podium. She was old even by galactic standards, her gray skin marked with the ritual scars of a dozen different peace negotiations. Her 6 eyes watched both delegations carefully as they took their places at opposite sides of the chamber. The emergency session had been called after 3 full cycles of war between the 2 greatest powers in the galaxy. 70 star systems had become battlegrounds. 47 worlds were now dead rocks floating in space. The trade routes that connected hundreds of civilizations had become killing fields where merchant ships feared to travel. Zixithara activated her translator and spoke first. Her voice carried the authority of someone who commanded fleets capable of burning entire worlds. The Crystalline Collective started this war when they attacked our mining colonies in the Outer Rim. Our miners were peaceful workers extracting resources from dead asteroids. The crystal beings murdered them without warning or provocation. Morden's diamond body flared with inner light, a sign of anger among his people. The Valerians lie as easily as they breathe. Those were not mining colonies. They were military bases built on our sacred crystal gardens. For 1,000 years, those asteroids have been holy sites where our ancestors grew the first living crystals. The flesh creatures came with their machines and began destroying everything we hold sacred. The 2 ambassadors glared at each other across the chamber. Other council members from smaller species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew that this meeting was likely their last chance to prevent the war from spreading to every corner of the galaxy. Military strategist Quental rose from his position near the data screens. The insectoid being's 4 arms moved rapidly over his control panels, bringing up holographic displays that filled the center of the chamber. Numbers and star charts appeared in the air, showing the true cost of the conflict. "The statistics are clear," Quental said in his clicking voice. 70 billion casualties across both sides. Economic damage exceeding the total production of 50 worlds. Military losses that have eliminated 60% of both fleets. At current rates of destruction, both civilizations will cease to exist within 5 more cycles. Ixandra studied the displays with growing concern. She had mediated conflicts for over 200 years, but never had she seen destruction on this scale. Wars usually ended when one side gained a clear advantage, or when both sides exhausted their resources. This conflict seemed different. Both, the Valerians and Crystallines, appeared willing to fight until every last member of their species was dead. "Surely reasonable beings can find a solution," she said, addressing both delegations. "The galaxy is vast enough for both your peoples. There are countless worlds where you could establish new colonies. Asteroids beyond counting where mining could continue without disturbing sacred sites." Zixithara's scales darkened with emotion. "We cannot accept any agreement that legitimizes their attack on our people. The crystal beings must pay for their crimes. They must surrender the leaders who ordered the massacre and provide compensation for our losses." Morden's inner light pulsed brighter. "We will never bow to flesh creature demands. Our sacred sites must be returned immediately, and all Valerian presence removed from our traditional territories. They must also provide rare minerals to help us regrow the crystal gardens they destroyed." The argument continued for hours. Neither side would compromise. Every proposal from the mediator was rejected immediately. As the artificial day cycle ended and the station's lights dimmed to simulate night, tensions in the chamber grew higher. Other council members began taking sides. The Trade Federation supported the Valerians, claiming that free movement of goods required protection of mining rights. The pacifist commune sided with the Crystallines, arguing that sacred sites deserved special protection under galactic law. By the third day of negotiations, weapons had been drawn twice in the council chamber itself. Only the intervention of station security had prevented bloodshed in the heart of galactic government. Ixandra was preparing to declare the mediation a failure when her aide burst through the chamber doors. Keltar was young, even by the standards of her species, barely old enough to serve in government roles. Her normally calm demeanor was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of someone who had seen something beyond comprehension. She ran to the mediator's podium without regard for protocol, her message tablet clutched in trembling hands. "The sensors," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "Long-range sensors have detected movement from the Sol system. 3 vessels have departed Earth's orbital shipyards. Large vessels, military configuration, they are heading this way." The council chamber fell silent instantly. Translator systems continued their work, but even they seemed to whisper the words that followed. Every species in the galaxy knew about the small blue world in the unfashionable spiral arm. Most had tried to forget. Zixathera felt her scales turn pale. She had read the classified reports about first contact with humanity. Every military officer in the Valerian fleet had studied them as part of their training in what to avoid at all costs. Mordune's inner light flickered and dimmed. The crystalline collective had their own encounters with the humans. Brief encounters that had ended with emergency evacuations and strict orders never to return to that sector of space. Ixandra looked around the chamber at the faces of delegates from dozens of species. She saw the same expression on every face regardless of their biology. Fear. Pure, cold fear of the implications of what they had just heard. The humans were coming. In 50 years of contact with Earth, no species had successfully established normal diplomatic relations with humanity. Not because humans were hostile, but because they were something far worse. They were competent in ways that defied all understanding of how civilized beings should behave. The war that had consumed the galaxy for 3 cycles suddenly seemed like a minor disagreement between children. Everyone in the chamber knew that. Human involvement would change everything in ways that no one could predict or control. The emergency session had been called to end a war. Instead, it had become something much more urgent, a desperate attempt to prevent something that every species in the galaxy feared more than death itself: human intervention. Council Archivist Velnara moved slowly toward the central data terminal, her 8 tentacles trembling with each step. The ancient being had served the Galactic Council for over 300 years, maintaining the vast archives of diplomatic records and first contact reports. She had read every document about every species the galaxy had ever encountered. None of those files frightened her like the ones she was about to access. Her tentacles danced across the control interface, entering the security codes that protected the most classified information in galactic space. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the official seal of the Terran Contact Division. Below it, in letters that seemed to glow with warning, appeared the words that made every diplomat in the galaxy uncomfortable. Species classification, human. Status, avoid all contact. Threat level, absolute. Velnara began reading aloud, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent council chamber. 50 years ago, the galaxy had made first contact with the small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star in the outer spiral arm. Long-range surveys had detected radio signals indicating a developing technological civilization. The initial reports described humans as a young species, barely capable of travel within their own solar system. The first diplomatic mission had seemed routine. Ambassador Threndock of the Trade Federation volunteered for the assignment, viewing it as an easy way to establish another client species for galactic commerce. His ship arrived in the Sol system, following standard first contact protocols. They transmitted friendship messages and requested permission to establish diplomatic relations. The human response had been immediate and courteous. Captain Jake Morrison of something called Earth Defense Force welcomed them to human space and invited them to visit the planet's surface. Threndock had been pleased by their cooperation. Most primitive species required months of careful negotiation. before allowing alien visitors on their homeworld. The shuttle ride to Earth had been pleasant. Morrison proved to be an excellent host, pointing out various human settlements and explaining their basic social structure. The humans appeared to be a peaceful agrarian species with some basic industry. Their cities were small and scattered. Their military forces seemed to consist mainly of ceremonial guards. Everything changed when Morrison offered to show his guest through what he called a history museum. Threndok accepted eagerly, hoping to learn more about human culture and development. The experience that followed would haunt the ambassador for the rest of his very long life. The museum was enormous, filled with artifacts spanning thousands of years of human development. Morrison began the tour in what he called the Stone Age, showing primitive tools and weapons made from rocks and animal bones. Threndok noted with interest that even their earliest implements were designed for hunting and warfare. As they moved through the exhibits, Morrison explained human history. With the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, he described ice ages that killed most life on the planet, plagues that wiped out entire continents, natural disasters that buried whole civilizations under ash and lava. Through it all, humans had not just survived, but grown stronger. The weapons. Displays grew more sophisticated as they progressed through time. Bronze swords gave way to iron spears. Crossbows evolved into firearms. Morrison explained each innovation cheerfully, noting how humans had continuously improved their ability to kill each other more efficiently. Threndok became increasingly uncomfortable as the tour continued. Most species developed weapons for hunting or defense against predators. Humans seemed to have developed their weapons primarily for fighting other humans. Morrison confirmed this suspicion when he explained that human history consisted largely of continuous warfare between different groups of their own species. The final section of the museum contained what Morrison called modern weapons. Threndok stared in horror at displays showing bombs capable of destroying entire cities. Vehicles designed to carry soldiers across any terrain while providing maximum firepower. Aircraft built specifically for attacking ground targets with devastating efficiency. When Morrison casually mentioned that humans had actually used nuclear weapons against each other and continued to exist as a species, Threndok requested immediate evacuation. The ambassador's final report to the Trade Federation contained a single recommendation: never contact this species again under any circumstances. The second attempt at establishing relations had involved the hegemony's military scouts. They detected unusual energy signatures from Earth's moon and decided to investigate. What they found there convinced the galaxy's premier military power to avoid human space entirely. Humans had built installations on their moon not for defense against alien invasion, but as training grounds for something they called asymmetric warfare. Colonel Lisa Hayes demonstrated their combat tactics to the terrified scouts, showing how numerically inferior forces could defeat much larger enemies through methods that defied all conventional military wisdom. Hayes explained that humans had developed these techniques through centuries of fighting each other. Small groups learned to defeat large armies by using tactics that their enemies could not predict or counter. She demonstrated urban warfare, guerrilla fighting, and psychological operations with the casual competence of someone who had spent their entire life preparing for conflict. The scouts reported that human military training included scenarios involving alien invasion, not defensive preparations but detailed plans for how human forces would attack and defeat technologically superior opponents. The humans seemed to assume that any alien contact would eventually lead to warfare and had prepared accordingly. The final attempt at integration came when the Galactic Council invited Earth to participate in the annual war games. These military exercises were considered more ceremony than actual combat, a chance for different species to demonstrate their martial traditions without real violence. Most participants treated them as elaborate parades with some mock combat thrown in for entertainment. Humanity sent a single ship called the ESS Defiance, commanded by Admiral Ben Carter and crewed by only 200 humans. They were assigned to face a coalition fleet representing 12 different species with over 50,000 vessels and 20 million personnel. The humans won. They did not just win. They dominated the exercise so completely that it had to be stopped after 6 hours. Carter's tactical decisions seemed to violate every principle of space warfare that the galaxy understood. His crew adapted to new situations faster than most species could even recognize that conditions had changed. Most disturbing was that the humans achieved victory without destroying a single enemy ship. They used electronic warfare, psychological manipulation, and tactical innovations that left their opponents confused and helpless. When the exercise ended, the coalition fleet was intact, but completely under human control. Carter's post-battle interview became required reading at every military academy in the galaxy. When asked how such a small force had defeated such overwhelming odds, he simply smiled and said that humans had been practicing this kind of warfare for thousands of years. He suggested that other species might want to avoid giving them more practice opportunities. Since then, no species had dared challenge Earth directly. Trade routes around human space were marked with warnings. Pirates avoided that sector entirely. Even the mention of possible human involvement in any conflict caused immediate ceasefires. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, not because they were cruel or aggressive, but because they were competent in ways that made other species feel like children playing with toys. They approached warfare like a science that they had spent millennia perfecting. Velnara finished reading the files and looked up at the silent council chamber. Every delegate now understood why the news of approaching human ships had created such terror. Earth was not sending diplomats or observers. They were sending Admiral Chris Stone and his fleet to end the war. Intelligence Officer Krenvash entered the council chamber carrying a datapad that seemed to weigh more than his entire body. The insectoid being had spent the last 3 days compiling surveillance reports from across the galaxy, focusing on human activities in the past year. His forearms moved nervously as he approached the central podium, knowing that the information he carried would terrify every delegate present. The holographic display activated at his touch, showing star charts of human space and the surrounding sectors. Red markers indicated increased military activity. Yellow showed industrial expansion. Blue marked civilian population movements. The entire display was covered in colors that painted a picture of a species preparing for something massive. Krenvash began his presentation with the industrial reports. Earth's manufacturing capacity had increased by 400% in the past 12 months. Every human colony showed signs of massive construction projects. Orbital shipyards that previously built merchant vessels had been converted to military production. Asteroid mining operations had tripled their output of metals used specifically for warship armor and weapons. Most concerning was the speed of this expansion. Other species required decades to achieve such industrial growth. Humans had accomplished it in a single year, through methods that defied galactic understanding of logistics and resource management. They seemed to approach large-scale construction the same way they approached warfare, with efficiency that bordered on the impossible. The personnel reports were even more disturbing. Human civilians were volunteering for military service in numbers that suggested their entire population had decided to become soldiers. Universities that taught engineering and medicine were now offering courses in military tactics and combat medicine. Children were enrolling in programs that other species would consider advanced military training. Trade station reports provided glimpses into human thinking that chilled every delegate in the chamber. Captain Susan Blake of the merchant vessel Terra Nova had been interviewed at Nexus Station 3 weeks ago. When asked about the ongoing galactic war, she mentioned that humanity was getting restless. Many humans viewed the current conflict as too small in scope to provide meaningful challenge. Blake had spoken casually about human military strategists developing contingency plans for what they called total galactic pacification. She seemed genuinely puzzled when the interviewer expressed alarm at this concept. To her, the idea of ending all warfare in the galaxy permanently was obviously a good thing that any reasonable species should support. The most terrifying intelligence came from intercepted human communications. Galactic surveillance networks had managed to record a conversation between Admiral Rob Foster and General Kate Phillips discussing strategic planning for potential involvement in the current war. Their casual tone suggested they were discussing routine logistics rather than operations that could reshape galactic civilization. Foster had mentioned that human war colleges were using the Valerian crystalline conflict as a teaching exercise. For advanced students, military academies were running simulations to determine the most efficient methods for ending the war with minimal casualties on all sides. The humans were not planning to help either side achieve victory. They were planning to defeat both fleets simultaneously and impose a peace settlement that no species would dare violate. Phillips had responded by noting that human doctrine called this overwhelming diplomatic force. The concept involved demonstrating military superiority so completely that future conflicts became unthinkable. She compared it to pest control, eliminating problems before they could spread and cause further damage. The linguistic analysis of human military terminology revealed concepts that had no equivalent in galactic languages. Humans had words for types of warfare that other species had never imagined. They discussed tactical innovations that treated entire star systems as single battlefields. Their strategic planning included scenarios that assumed conflicts involving millions of ships and trillions of personnel. Surveillance footage from human colonies showed civilian activities that confirmed the galaxy's worst fears about their nature. Human children played games that incorporated military tactics more sophisticated than the strategies used by most galactic species. Their educational systems taught mathematics using examples drawn from ballistics and orbital mechanics. Their entertainment media glorified conflicts on scales that made the current galactic war seem like a minor border dispute. Most disturbing were the psychological profiles compiled by xenopsychology experts. Humans appeared to actually enjoy conflict. Not just victory or survival, but the challenge of warfare itself. While other species fought for resources, territory, or ideology, humans seemed to fight for the pure pleasure of testing themselves against difficult opponents. This trait explained their unusual approach to the war games that had shocked the galaxy years earlier. Admiral Ben Carter and his crew had not sought to minimize casualties or achieve quick victory. They had deliberately chosen the most challenging possible tactics, turning a simple military exercise into a demonstration of human problem-solving capabilities. The psychological reports suggested that humans viewed warfare as a form of competitive sport. They respected opponents who provided interesting challenges and seemed genuinely disappointed when conflicts ended too quickly. Their military philosophy emphasized adapting to unexpected situations rather than following established doctrine. Human military academies taught something called creative destruction, a concept that involved breaking conventional rules to achieve impossible objectives. Students learned to view every limitation as a problem to be solved, rather than an obstacle to be accepted. This mindset produced military leaders who approached warfare like scientists conducting experiments. The surveillance data included recordings of human military training exercises that demonstrated capabilities far beyond what their technology should have allowed. Small units achieved objectives that should have required much larger forces. Individual soldiers displayed tactical awareness that most species associated with advanced artificial intelligence systems. Human pilots flew spacecraft in patterns that violated basic principles of physics, using gravitational fields and stellar phenomena as tactical elements in ways that suggested they viewed the universe itself as a weapon to be wielded. Their engineers built fortifications that turned entire asteroids into defensive positions, capable of withstanding attacks by full battle fleets. The final section of Cranvash's report contained projections of human capabilities based on observed expansion rates. If current trends continued, Earth would possess the industrial capacity to build fleets larger than the combined forces of every other species in the galaxy. Their population growth and military recruitment suggested they could field armies numbering in the billions within a few years. More concerning was the timeline analysis. The human military buildup had begun exactly 3 years ago, shortly after the first reports of tensions between the Valerian Empire and Crystalline Collective reached Earth. This suggested that humans had been preparing for galactic conflict since before the war actually started. Intelligence analysts concluded that humanity viewed the current war as an inevitable development that required preparation rather than a crisis to be avoided. They had spent 3 years getting ready to end a conflict that other species had hoped would resolve itself through negotiation or mutual exhaustion. As Cranvash finished his presentation, every delegate in the council chamber understood that the approaching human fleet represented something far more dangerous than military intervention. Earth was not sending peacekeepers or mediators. They were sending specialists in a type of warfare that the galaxy had never experienced and was completely unprepared to face. Admiral Zetharun of the Valerian Fourth Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display that showed something he had never expected to see in his 40 years of military service. Crystalline Battle Commander Silkara floated beside him in her containment field, her diamond body reflecting the light from dozens of screens showing fleet positions across 3 star systems. For the first time in recorded history, the Valerian Empire and Crystalline Collective were working together. The ancient enemies had put aside centuries of mistrust and hatred because they faced something that terrified them more than each other. The humans were coming, and survival required unity that neither species had thought possible. The Joint Command Center aboard Zetharun's vessel buzzed with activity as officers from both fleets coordinated their forces. Valerian tactical specialists worked alongside Crystalline strategic planners, sharing information that had been classified military secrets just days earlier. Translation systems worked overtime as the two species struggled to develop common procedures and terminology. The combined fleet represented the largest military force in galactic history. 12,000 warships from both empires had been assembled in the disputed territory. 400 million soldiers stood ready for deployment. The firepower concentrated in this single location could sterilize entire star systems or reduce planetary crusts to molten slag. Every major species in the galaxy had contributed ships, weapons, or personnel to the coalition. The Trade Federation sent their fastest courier vessels to serve as communication relays. The pacifist commune provided hospital ships and medical supplies despite their philosophical objections to warfare. Even the reclusive hive minds emerged from their isolated sectors to offer support. The defensive plan was simple in concept, but massive in execution. 3 defensive lines would protect the disputed worlds from human intervention. Each line was designed to present the approaching fleet with such overwhelming opposition that even humans would reconsider their involvement. The outer perimeter consisted of automated defense platforms positioned at the edge of the star system. Thousands of unmanned weapon stations created an overlapping network of sensors and firepower that could track and engage targets at extreme range. These platforms were designed to provide early warning and force any attacking fleet to reveal their capabilities while still far from their objectives. The middle defensive line featured the main battle fleets arranged in defensive formations that maximized their combined firepower. Valerian energy weapons complemented crystalline particle beams. Fast attack craft from smaller species provided screening forces while heavy battleships formed the backbone of resistance. The formations had been tested in simulation hundreds of times to ensure maximum effectiveness. The inner core protected the disputed worlds themselves with planetary shield generators and surface-to-space weapons. Every habitable planet in the FY region bristled with defensive installations. Orbital fortresses provided additional firepower, while underground bunkers sheltered civilian populations. The planets had been turned into fortified positions that could withstand prolonged siege. Military analysts from every participating species had calculated the requirements for breaking through such defenses. Conservative estimates suggested that any attacking force would need at least 50,000 warships and would suffer casualties exceeding 1 billion personnel. The mathematics of warfare indicated that even the most aggressive military commanders would find such costs unacceptable. Zetharun reviewed the tactical displays showing defensive positions throughout the region. Red markers indicated weapon emplacements. Blue showed shield generators and defensive fields. Green marked supply depots and reinforcement staging areas. The entire sector had been transformed into a fortress designed to stop any conceivable assault. Silkara manipulated her own displays, showing intelligence reports about human fleet movements. Long-range sensors tracked 3 vessels approaching the defensive perimeter at steady velocity. Energy signatures indicated these were full-sized battleships rather than reconnaissance craft. Either the humans were conducting an extremely bold scouting mission, or they believed 3 ships were sufficient to defeat the largest military coalition in galactic history. Both possibilities were equally disturbing to military minds trained in conventional warfare. No rational commander would send such a small force against such overwhelming defenses unless they possessed capabilities that rendered traditional military calculations meaningless. The humans had demonstrated such capabilities before, but never on this scale. Coalition intelligence officers had spent days analyzing every scrap of information about human military technology and tactics. Their warships used energy sources that defied galactic understanding of physics. Their weapons seemed to ignore conventional defensive measures. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to make tactical decisions faster than computer systems could process information. The defensive preparations continued around the clock as the human fleet approached. Engineers worked frantically to complete shield installations and weapon placements. Supply convoys moved constantly between defensive positions, ensuring that every unit had adequate ammunition and provisions for extended combat. Medical facilities prepared for casualties on a scale that no galactic conflict had ever produced. Communication networks linked every ship and installation in the defensive grid. Backup systems provided redundancy in case primary channels were disrupted. Command structures were simplified to allow rapid response to changing tactical situations. Everything possible had been done to ensure coordinated resistance against human intervention. As the final preparations neared completion, Zethron found himself studying historical records of human military operations. The War Games incident remained the most detailed example of human tactical methods. Admiral Ben Carter's decisions during that exercise had been analyzed by military academies across the galaxy, but no one had successfully explained how such a small force had achieved such complete victory. The human approach to warfare seemed to violate fundamental principles that every galactic species accepted as natural laws. They treated overwhelming odds as interesting puzzles rather than impossible obstacles. Their tactical innovations suggested they viewed the universe itself as a weapon that could be turned against their enemies. Silkara's crystalline form pulsed with patterns that indicated deep thought among her people. She had been reviewing psychological profiles of human military leaders, trying to understand the mindset that produced such unusual strategic thinking. The report suggested that humans actually became more effective when facing superior opposition, as if difficulty enhanced their capabilities rather than limiting them. Coalition commanders found themselves preparing for a type of conflict that had no precedent in galactic military history. Traditional defensive strategies assumed that attackers would follow conventional tactical doctrine. Human military philosophy seemed to reject the very concept of conventional limitations. The final hours before human arrival were spent in nervous preparation and desperate hope that overwhelming force would prove sufficient to deter intervention. Every officer in the coalition fleet understood that they were about to discover whether mathematics and traditional military wisdom could prevail against human innovation and adaptability. As sensor networks detected the human fleet dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the defensive perimeter, 12,000 warships prepared for a battle that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The human fleet materialized at the edge of the defensive perimeter, exactly when their calculations predicted they would arrive. 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls absorbing sensor scans like black holes, swallowing light. The ESS Retribution, ESS Vengeance, and ESS Determination hung motionless in space, studying the massive defensive network spread before them. Admiral Chris Stone stood on the bridge of the Retribution, reviewing tactical displays that showed 12,000 enemy vessels arranged in defensive formations across 3 star systems. His expression remained calm as he studied the positions of automated weapon platforms, shield generators, and planetary fortifications. To the human commander, the overwhelming opposition looked like an interesting engineering problem rather than an impossible military challenge. The coalition fleet detected the human arrival immediately. Warning signals flashed across command centers throughout the defensive network. Admiral Zethron felt his scales turn cold as he watched the sensor readings from his flagship. 3 small contacts against 12,000 defenders seemed like a joke, but no one in the coalition command structure was laughing. Battle Commander Silkara's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy as she analyzed the human ship configurations. Their hulls appeared to be made from materials that defied conventional physics. Energy readings suggested power sources that generated more electricity than most star systems produced naturally. The humans had brought technology that made galactic military equipment look like primitive tools. Stone activated his communication systems and opened a channel that reached every ship, station, and planet in the disputed region simultaneously. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had spent decades resolving conflicts that other commanders considered impossible. The words he spoke were simple and direct, but they carried implications that chilled every listener to their core. This is Admiral Stone of the Earth Defense Force. We have received reports of an ongoing conflict in this region that threatens galactic stability. Effective immediately, all hostilities will cease. Any vessel that fires a weapon, activates targeting systems, or makes aggressive maneuvers will be considered a threat to galactic peace and dealt with accordingly. The communication ended, leaving the Coalition fleet in stunned silence. 12,000 warships faced 3 human vessels, and somehow the humans had made it sound like the Coalition was outnumbered. Stone had not requested negotiations or offered terms for discussion. He had simply announced that the war was over, and expected immediate compliance. Zetharun found his voice first, broadcasting a response on all frequencies. By what authority do humans presume to dictate terms to the sovereign governments of the galaxy? This conflict involves matters that Earth has no standing to address. We demand that you withdraw immediately and allow local authorities to resolve their own disputes. Stone's reply came within seconds, delivered in the same calm tone he had used for his initial announcement. By right of superior force, our authority is our ability to enforce our will. If you require demonstration of our capabilities, please continue your current course of action. We are prepared to provide object lessons in applied military science. The Coalition commanders tried to activate their targeting systems, hoping to lock weapons onto the human ships and force them to negotiate from a position of mutual threat. What happened next defied every principle of military technology that galactic civilization understood. Every weapon system in the Coalition fleet simply stopped working. Targeting computers displayed error messages in languages that their programmers had never seen. Energy weapons refused to charge. Missile launchers remained sealed shut. 12,000 warships found themselves armed with nothing more dangerous than their running lights. Worse than the weapons failure was the communication breakdown that followed immediately. Ships that had been in constant contact with their fleet commanders found themselves isolated and alone. Each vessel could receive only the transmissions that the humans chose to allow. In less than 10 minutes, the largest military coalition in galactic history had been reduced to 12,000 separate ships, cut off from coordination and stripped of offensive capability. The technical impossibility of what the humans had accomplished was more terrifying than any display of destructive firepower could have been. They had neutralized an entire fleet without firing a single shot or destroying any equipment. Every system still functioned normally except for weapons and communications, suggesting that human technology could selectively disable specific functions across thousands of different ship designs simultaneously. Stone's voice returned to fill the silence that had replaced military communications throughout the fleet. We will now discuss the terms of what Earth calls the Galactic Peace Accord. All disputed territories will be administered by a joint commission under human oversight until permanent boundaries can be established through peaceful negotiation. Military fleets will be reduced to defensive forces only. Any future conflicts will be mediated by human arbitrators whose decisions are final and non-negotiable. The terms were harsh but fair, and most importantly, they allowed both the Valerian Empire and Crystalline Collective to survive with their dignity intact. Neither side would be forced to admit defeat or pay tribute to their enemies. The disputed worlds would be managed by neutral administrators until proper settlements could be reached through diplomatic rather than military means. Admiral Zetharun considered the alternatives to accepting human terms. His fleet was helpless and isolated. Continuing resistance would likely result in demonstrations of human military capability that no one wanted to witness. The peace offer provided a way to end the war without the complete destruction that continued fighting would certainly bring. Battle Commander. Silkara reached the same conclusion through crystalline logic that valued survival above pride. The collective had entered this war to protect sacred sites and preserve their culture. Human arbitration offered better chances of achieving those goals than continued military action against an opponent who had neutralized their entire fleet without visible effort. Both coalition leaders announced their acceptance of human terms, simultaneously, speaking on communication channels that somehow worked perfectly despite the technical failures affecting everything else. The agreement was followed immediately by similar acceptances from every other species represented in the defensive network. As quickly as the crisis had begun, it ended. Weapon systems throughout the coalition fleet returned to normal operation. Communication networks resumed standard function. The humans had demonstrated that their control over galactic military technology was voluntary rather than permanent, making their restraint more impressive than their capabilities. Admiral Stone delivered his final message to the galaxy before departing. Humanity hopes this intervention will not be necessary again. We prefer to focus our energies on exploration, discovery, and peaceful development. However, we will not hesitate to return if galactic peace is threatened. We trust this understanding is clear to all parties involved. The 3 human ships disappeared into hyperspace as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving behind a galaxy that finally understood its place in the cosmic order. The war was over. Peace had been imposed through superior competence rather than superior firepower. Most importantly, everyone agreed that humans must never be involved in galactic affairs again. The Galactic Council passed Resolution 1 of the new era within hours of the human departure. In all future conflicts, local authorities will resolve disputes through negotiation, compromise, and, if necessary, traditional warfare. Under no circumstances will Earth be contacted for assistance. This resolution is permanent, unanimous, and absolutely non-negotiable. In the margins of the official document, written in handwriting so small it required magnification to read, someone had added a final note that captured the feelings of every species in the galaxy. Because the ice cure is worse than the disease.